Okay, you're listening to Hall Monitor on WPPM 106.5 in Philadelphia, Comcast Channel 66, and streaming live at phillycam.org. You can find us on Twitter at Hall Monitor WPPM, on our website www.hallmonitor.org, or on Facebook at PHWWPPM. Today on the program, we're going to have a reassessment theme show. We will be joined by Kate Dugan from Community Legal Services to discuss the city's reassessments. And as we can see them right now, what some of the potential recourses are. And Lance Haver, our own Lance Haver, will discuss how registered community organizations throughout the city are preparing to deal with the reassessments. So, Lance, how are you tonight?
I'm all right, but like everyone else, I am sad. There's unfortunate news.
And yesterday, once again, there was another school shooting, this time in Texas. And these things are happening with, I mean, and I'd almost want to say greater frequency, but I feel like it's been consistent for the last 20 years or so that we've been seeing these things. And the only thing I can really think of, I think I've had a lot of thoughts about this and a lot of concerns, which have only been heightened by the fact that I now have a 1.5-year-old son, and that magnifies the situation a little bit more, creates a little more, I don't even know what the word is, but you just feel it a little bit more. The only thing I could think of that sort of articulates it maybe is the great book Slaughterhouse-Five by Kurt Vonnegut, which is one of my all-time favorites. And in that book, he says, there's nothing intelligent to say about a massacre. And I think that's absolutely right. There's nothing intelligent to say. There's nothing that I can add, that any of us can add, that hasn't been said for 20 years. I think the one thing we can do is, in subsequent weeks on this program, is have more discussions about ways to stop these situations from occurring. And that's one of the things we're going to pledge to do. You know, the nice thing about having a program like this is we have experts who are willing to come on and share their expertise with us. So that's something that we're going to be looking to do in the future, to talk more about this for whatever that's worth. And I don't know what it's worth. I don't know what gets accomplished, but it's the thing we can do. So it's the thing we will do. And I guess that's really all I have to say about that right now. But in the coming weeks, we're going to be talking more about ways these terrible situations can hopefully be mitigated. So with that said, tonight, as I said, we're going to be doing a reassessment theme show. This is also something we're going to be spending a lot of time on in the coming weeks, because we know how important this is and how detrimental this can be to people in our city. So we've had interviews with the chief assessor of OPA, with the revenue department. We hope to have them on again soon to see where we are with the situation. We'll also be talking to members of city council about legislation that has been proposed and hopefully will be passed before the end of the session. Tonight, we're going to bring you an interview with Kate Dugan, who is a lawyer from Community Legal Services, and she works a lot on housing issues. So she's going to tell you a little bit about what they're thinking and have some information, some early information about things that people can be doing right now to prepare for these reassessments. So here's our interview with Kate Dugan. All right, Kate Dugan, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.
So the first thing I'd like to, before we get into the property assessments, the first thing I'd like to talk about is CLS in general. What is CLS and how do you help people?
So CLS represents low-income Philadelphians in a variety of civil legal matters. Specifically, the unit I work in is called the Homeownership and Consumer Rights Unit. We represent people in mortgage foreclosure, tax foreclosure, tangled titles, all sorts of home ownership and consumer issues, but there are a lot of other units at CLS. who provide a wide range of civil legal services.
And what specifically is your role?
So I am a member of the property tax team. So a big bulk of the work I do has to do with property taxes, helping people enroll in programs, defending property tax foreclosures. But I do also handle mortgage foreclosure and tangle title cases as well.
Oh, okay. So those are a lot of things that we hear a lot about lately that people are having issues with.
Yeah, and a lot of them overlap. Often somebody will have a property tax problem that's overlapping with a tangle title problem. So we do a lot of coordination between legal problems.
Okay. So let's get into the assessments a little bit then. So property assessments came out a week or two ago, and there's been a lot of concern about this. The first thing I'd like to talk to you a little bit about is the process itself. Do you have any concerns about how the assessment process was undertaken?
So what we know right now is that the city moved to a new process of assessing properties. We don't yet know a whole lot about that process. So I would say in terms of having concerns about that process specifically, it might be a little too early. We're hopeful that the city and the OPA will release information that helps us figure out if there should be things we are worried about. Suffice it to say that the city controller released a map a couple of weeks ago that showed where the biggest increases in property tax assessments were. And we are certainly concerned that those huge increases are happening in low-income Black and brown neighborhoods. A lot of the areas around Temple, in Strawberry Mansion, places like that, residents, long-time low-income residents are really seeing huge tax increases. So we are concerned, if not about the process, about the impact it's going to have on people.
Sure. And I'm not sure if you can answer this question. Maybe nobody can because we're not at a point where we know enough yet. But in 2018, City Council commissioned an audit of OPA's processes and procedures, and it found that they were below industry standard in certain categories. Maybe we don't know, but do you have any indication that positive changes have occurred since then to help in the process?
So I think, given that the change really happened in the past couple of weeks, because remember, the city did not do big reassessments during the pandemic. So it's been a couple of years. So I think it's a little early to say, and we're certainly digging into that information. And I know the OPA has explained that their new model of assessing properties is within industry standards. So.
And they had commissioned a report, I believe, last year that indicated that was the fact, that they believe that they're at that level now.
That's their position right now, yes.
Yeah. So has your department been getting a lot of calls about this from concerned citizens?
So we are getting some calls. The thing I'm worried about is that a lot of people don't know that this is an issue yet. You may have heard during city council hearings that the OPA, while it has released these assessments, it is not mailing out those envelopes that tell people what their assessments are until possibly September. So, whereas on May 9th, I was sitting on the computer refreshing, to see what my own property's assessed value was going to be, somebody without internet access, seniors, people who are limited English proficient may not even know that their properties are doubling in value next year. And given the deadlines to enroll in programs and to appeal assessments, right now we are mostly working on outreach to let people know that they may need to call us.
Yeah, and that's doubly concerning because the opportunities to appeal come pretty quickly after, if that notice goes out in September, I believe it's in October.
It's currently in October. The city would have the power to extend that, and the OPA has indicated that, we'll see when the assessments go out, and then they can adjust the deadline accordingly for that first level review.
Yeah, and just it almost sounds like silliness, but it's true that they spoke about an envelope shortage,
yes.
And they're not certain how that's going to play into this. I mean, I would just call the water department and say, hey, could you put these in your bills? But I mean, there's, that's another issue. There's all kinds of concerns here. So the people who have contacted you so far, what kinds of things have you been telling them?
So something that we always do whenever people contact us, even before these assessments, is walk through, make sure people are in all the property tax relief programs they qualify for. So if they are a senior, for the senior spikes later in 2023 and beyond. So we're helping people think through, is it worth appealing your assessment? But I think at this point right now, we really are just trying to make sure people are insulated against these increases.
And then as we talk, maybe long term, and when I say long term, I mean maybe now until the end of the year, is there any other recourse that citizens have in order to challenge this process or to in any other way mitigate the expenses they'll be incurring?
So there are, somebody who thinks their assessment is incorrect should certainly consider appealing, and they should do that as soon as possible, and make sure that they're in all those tax programs that they qualify for. And I mean, other than that, we know that City Council has already introduced a bill to increase the homestead exemption. That was something announced by the mayor pretty early on. So, just calling your council person saying this would really help me and I support this. Watching the news to see what kind of tax relief programs unfold over the next few months will be important.
Yeah. So I have a couple other questions here, and I'm going to preface them by saying I'm not an attorney, which I always say when I ask legal questions. But I have these two questions that have been kind of rolling around in my head since last week or so. So the city has said that they're going to release the information explaining how the assessments were calculated. If they don't, or if they only release a portion of it, could property owners have some kind of legal recourse to say, well, I don't know how this occurred. I don't know how you got to this number.
So I think the technical answer to that is if a property owner thinks their assessment is incorrect, whatever the method, they have the right to appeal. So it's certainly possible that the OPA's methods have, for certain properties, led to inaccurate assessments. But what property owners need to be focusing on now is, A, do I think my assessment is accurate, whatever the method? And B, what can I do to mitigate the effects of that assessment if it's accurate, or when it gets changed, it's still going to be a bigger tax bill. So I think it's less about the methods you get to and more about, looking, is it worth appealing?
And perhaps inspired by the revolutionary sensibilities of Memorial Day weekend coming up, my last question here is, because these assessments occur under the oversight of the administration without really council input, could this be considered an example of taxation without representation?
So the OPA is tasked with performing accurate assessments. It is not tasked with setting the tax rate. It's not tasked with doing property tax relief programs. That's the stuff that's within the the umbrella of council to do. But remember, OPA is not setting the tax rate. All they are supposed to be doing is saying, how much is this house worth for tax purposes? So I that's probably like a pretty fine distinction. But if the question is this, is this taxation in an undemocratic way? I think the important thing to remember is there's aspects of taxation that have nothing to do with the OPA. That they really are there to just come out with assessments as accurately as possible.
Okay. I'd like to bring Denise Clay-Murray here on Philadelphia Hall Monitor.
Hi, and thank you, Larry, and thank you for joining us. We really appreciate it. You say that if folks want to, they're able to appeal their assessment if they think it's incorrect. What is the appeals process, and is there an expense to that?
Right. So there's a 2-track appeals process. And I have to say the names for these processes are misleading, and I'll explain in a second. So the formal way to appeal is to file an appeal to the Board of Revision of Taxes. That's the administrative agency that hears appeals. The deadline to do that is October 3rd, and you can do that as soon as today. So somebody who can go on the internet, figure out what their tax assessment is, say, hey, I think that's wrong. They can file an appeal today to the Board of Revision of Taxes. There's also something called a first level review. And this is why it's misleading. It is not a prerequisite to filing a Board of Revision of Taxes appeal. It is not a first level, and then the second level is the BRT. It is simply an informal appeals process to the OPA itself to say, hey, I think you got it wrong. That is the thing that you have to wait till you get those mailed envelopes for. So right now, if somebody thinks their assessment is incorrect, they should file that formal BRT appeal and watch the mail for their assessment envelope. They can also choose to file the first level review. As to whether there are expenses, it doesn't cost money to actually file. Some people do choose to get an appraisal of their property if they think an appraisal would show that the market value of their property is too low. Appraisals are not free, but it is also not something that you absolutely must include with your appeal. Some people also hire lawyers to represent them during their appeals, but again, the BRT does not require you to have a lawyer, so you can choose whether or not to do that.
Does community legal services provide that kind of legal assistance to people?
So on the tax team, we do occasional assessment appeals. It is not the bulk of our work. A lot of the work we do is defending people who are at risk of losing their homes to property tax foreclosure. But I do have some colleagues who have done assessment appeals. So it's something we would, potentially take on, but not, I would say at this point, right now, not the core of our work.
Now, you mentioned that you all also handle helping people who are about to lose their home. Have people called you up concerned about an increase in that due to these assessments?
Yeah, so I think that's not something we're going to see this month or next month, but I certainly think that if people starting next year can't afford their property tax bills, there is certainly a risk of people losing their homes either to property tax foreclosure or to mortgage foreclosure if they can't afford their increased mortgage payments as a result of a tax increase. So it's something we're concerned about, but it's something that we think will happen probably, not immediately.
Now, you also mentioned some of the programs that the city has to provide mitigation in these instances. Now, a lot of people, and it's odd to me because a lot of these programs have been around for a while, still don't know that they have access to them and what they can use. What can be done to change that? Is it like a function of people from the Loop program, for example, getting on television and doing more advertisements? How do we bring up the knowledge level here?
That's a really great question. So CLS does outreaches at all sorts of events with council members, state reps, state senators, senior senators, just to try to get the word out. And I know the Department of Revenue does that too. They have a unit devoted to outreach. I know one of the things on the table, I think with Mayor Keddy's proposal, is increased resources to help revenue do outreach. And it's also a matter of if somebody applies for one tax program, if they're an owner occupant, we certainly advocate for revenue screening them for any other programs. For example, if you get into an owner occupied payment agreement for delinquent taxes, the Department of Revenue will now screen you and put you in the homestead exemption if you're in an agreement, because the Venn diagram of what you need for those things is a circle. So just using systems to kind of screen people and identify them, as opposed to just putting ads out there that people may or may not see.
Okay. Now, in terms if someone wanted to contact you to get more information about all of this stuff, because I'm sure that right now there's a 80-something-year-old woman who's lived in her house since her husband bought it for her in World War II, that's looking at her assessment and thinking, okay, this is the time where they're going to come and get my house. I need help. How would they connect with you?
So there are a couple ways to do that. A great way to connect with all sorts of legal and housing counseling help is to call the Save Your Home Philly hotline, which is 215-334-4663. That is a city-funded hotline run out of our sister organization, Philadelphia Legal Assistance. And some problems do not require a lawyer. As a lawyer, I'm happy to say that, you don't need me for everything. If you call and, identify as I'm a senior, I really think I need to be in the freeze, I'm worried about my taxes are going up. the hotline can connect you with a free housing counselor to help you do that. And, housing counselors are able to loop in CLS if something gets complicated or they identify a legal problem. So I would say if anybody is worried or they just want to know, like, is there a program I qualify for? The Save Your Home Philly hotline is a really great resource.
Okay. Well, thank you. I'm going to turn it back over to Larry McGlynn, my co-host.
Thanks, Denise. Kate, thank you so much for joining us and walking us through this. As the process goes on, we hope we can have you back to talk more about this once we kind of know what's going to happen. But thank you so much for joining us.
Of course.
Okay. We'd like to thank Kate Dugan for joining us on WPPM 106.5. And we are joined by Denise Clay Murray. Denise, how are you? Oh, you're muted.
I'm good. How are you?
Good, good. Before anything else, we have to acknowledge that yesterday was Denise Clay Murray's birthday. So happy birthday, Denise.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
And go ahead, Lance. I'm sorry.
No, we hope you did something great.
Oh, I did. My husband took me out to dinner and we just kind of hung out, even though I had to work, and we'll probably do something this weekend, but it was just nice, people reaching out and saying, hey, happy birthday and stuff, because, I managed to survive another year without, really pissing everybody off. But
Well, I am right now trying to, oh, there we go. Okay. I am trying to share my screen here, which I think I have successfully done. All right, hold on. So, very briefly, I just want to run through a couple of things. So, a couple of things we mentioned in that interview that people should be aware of, and we're going to put this in our newsletter. It's on our Facebook page, our Twitter page. The first thing is the senior citizen tax freeze, which freezes your real estate taxes if you meet certain age and income requirements. So if you're 65 years or older, you live in the same household with a spouse who is 65 plus, or you are 50 years old plus and a widow of someone who reached the age of 65 before passing away, and the income requirements are a single person, $33,500 a year or less, or a married couple, $41,500 a year or less, you qualify for the senior citizen tax freeze. And Council Member Brian O'Neill put forth some legislation to expand or to extend the deadline for that. So we're going to see what happens with that legislation. I would expect it to pass. I don't think it's anything too controversial. So those are the stipulations for the senior citizen tax freeze. The LOOP program, the long-time owner-occupant program, is a program for homeowners whose assessments have increased significantly if they meet certain requirements. Your home assessment increased by 50% or more since the last year. And in the past, that hadn't happened too often. This year, it did. I think there's a lot of people who saw 50% plus increases.
And it's not cumulative. So if it went up 50% in 3 years, that doesn't mean you'll qualify.
Right.
The program is written so narrowly that it has to be 50%, above 50% after the homestead in 1 year alone. So if every year you're looking at a 30% increase, it has the same impact on the homeowner, but the homeowner won't qualify.
Right, right. And you have to have lived in your home for 10 years or more. Your property taxes have to be paid, or you're in an owner-occupant payment agreement or installment plan, and your income is below the minimum for a family your size. Kind of tight stipulations there. There are about 15,000 people citywide who are in that program now. It is possible that some of these stipulations could be amended before the end of the council session. We've heard a little bit about that possibly happening. And then the homestead exemption reduces the taxable value of your primary residence by $45,000. There isn't any age or income requirements. And you can basically just go to the Revenue Department's website and apply for this. So there's legislation. The administration, the mayor's office, said that they would be interested in raising the homestead exemption to $65,000. Again, Councilmember O'Neill put forth a bill that would raise it to $90,000, which is the maximum by law. The way it's calculated is you are allowed to offer a homestead exemption up to 50% of the median cost of a house in your municipality. The median cost in Philadelphia is about $180,000, so $90,000 would be about right. And the way this works is if the homestead exemption is $45,000 and your house is worth $245,000, you would subtract 45,000 and you would pay your property taxes based on $200,000. You're reducing it by 45,000. If the homestead exemption goes up to 65,000 or even that 90,000 number, you subtract that number and pay on what's left. So these are some of the things that are being talked about and some of the things that you can apply for right now. There's going to be some other legislation that we've been hearing about. Councilmember Mark Squilla put forth a bill that if you appealed your reassessment, you would only have to pay your previous year's tax amount until your assessment was settled. So that's it. That's a good piece of legislation. I think we're going to see some other things, but that's where we are right now in terms of city council. Now, Lance, you've been keeping an eye on how the RCOs are handling this.
Right. The RCOs, and I'm the treasurer of the Hawthorne Empowerment Coalition, which is the RCO for the neighborhood that goes from South Street to Washington Avenue, from Broad Street to 11th Street. And our neighborhood is a neighborhood that's in transition. The Martin Luther King project, homes or development was here. It was a very difficult time for the neighborhood. The longtime residents worked very hard to have those homes transferred into affordable housing around a park that's called the Hawthorne Park. They were very successful. The nature of the neighborhood has changed tremendously as a result of all the neighbors' hard work. And frankly, all that they put up with when they were accused of doing different things by trying to make the neighborhood safer. For example, behind where I live, there's a small street, and it used to be that quote unquote working girls were working there. The neighborhood got together, had town watch, and really changed the whole nature of it. And now, as a result of that, people want to live in our neighborhood. And what we're seeing is this incredible increase in tax assessments. And it's going on here and in many other neighborhoods. So the RCOs, the registered community organizations, are circulating letters amongst themselves and asking for the RCOs to email or write or speak with their council person to let them know how upset they are about what's happening. That longtime residents are really bad. I think most of us would agree that we want to live in a neighborhood that's safe, where there's no short dumping, where the drug houses are gone, where there's a local supermarket where we can shop, a dry cleaner where we can get our clothes cleaned, that we all like those amenities. We don't want to see, once we're successful at bringing those amenities back into our neighborhood, successful in doing that, pushed out. And so that's what's going on now. There are some of the RCO leaders I've heard from who are incredibly cynical about OPA's claim that they can't find envelopes. And here's what they are saying. They believe that while council is still in session and still discussing the budget, if OPA had mailed out these new assessments, there would have been a much larger uprising. Many more people would have contacted their council person, and council would make this a primary issue. As a result of OPA making it very difficult for people to know what's going on, we find only the people who are already connected to government, who are already online, who are already reading the newspaper, knowing about it. And so the full impact isn't felt yet. And as Ms. Duggan was talking about from Community Legal Services, she's not getting the phone calls yet because people don't know yet. It's a very small percentage of people who read the Philadelphia Inquirer and have been reading the story. And while we like to think that Hall Monitor is reaching tens of thousands of people. The reality is we're reaching 5,000 people, and the overwhelming majority of homeowners, there's almost 400,000 of them, don't know yet what's going on. And if OPA had sent out the letter last week or 2 weeks ago, before council was negotiating the budget with the mayor, during the budget hearings, there would have been much greater opportunity for council to go forward and to have a solution. Now, if the OPA mails after the budget is done, it's going to be harder for council to take any action to protect homeowners.
And that's the biggest concern right now, right? That it's going to take so long for people to know about this. And I think you're absolutely right. I found it strange that the assessments were released the same morning, almost the exact same time as the OPA's budget hearing. And in real, it was strange to watch. In real time, you're seeing council members during their, the round robin questions they do, saying, "Hey, I just got this email from a constituent saying their assessment went up 51%. Like, what am I supposed to do about that?" And if they're not going to be able to mail the assessments out, the earliest I'm hearing is midsummer, the absolute earliest.
Right, and by law, the budget has to be done before that.
Oh yeah, budget has to be done before July 1st.
So now what's going to happen? How will council allocate money to expand any of these programs? And the demand on council doing that is much lower now because OPA, again, if you're cynical, because OPA purposely didn't put out the mailing. If I were the one who wanted to hide what's going on, this would be a perfect way to do it and blame it on a supply chain, right? Something people seem to go, oh, okay, I can't show up for my job because of supply chain issues. Like, what does that have to do with you taking SEPTA to work? How is that a supply chain issue? What do you mean you didn't know you were going to need envelopes last year to mail this out this year? You heard about all the supply chain issues and you did what? Absolutely nothing. So, I mean, to be kind, they're inefficient and they're not doing a good job. To be cynical is to say they're planning this. How do you keep the uproar to a minimum? And that is you don't tell the majority of the people what's happening. And by the way, anyone who's ever opened up that letter knows right at the top of it, it typically says this is not a bill. So a fair number of people seeing this is not a bill immediately put it aside and don't calculate what's happening. And the idea that somehow the rate of the taxation rate isn't clearly defined so that people know what the effect of the assessment is also something a cynical person could say is an attempt to let OPA get away with raising taxes without anyone knowing it. So, it's the tax rate is 1.3883%. But there's no reason why someone like me has to tell people that. That should be in the letter. That should be in all the stories. That should be part of what everyone understands, that in every other part of the state, when they do a reassessment, it's supposed to be revenue neutral, and the tax rate goes down when the assessment goes up. It's only in Philadelphia, just like we're the only city that doesn't elect a school board, that loses that franchise. We can't vote for our school, for who runs our schools. Well, we're also given an automatic tax increase by the assessment because the tax rate doesn't necessarily have to go down. Now,
well, while the assessment thing is bad, and I'm sorry, as long as Staples continues to exist, you can't convince me that you cannot find any envelopes anywhere in the city of Philadelphia, especially when all you got to do is go right around the corner from City Hall. And I know this because I have gone to this particular Staples more than once. All you got to do is go to the Staples on 15th Street. You can even grab a burger at Wendy's when you're done if you want to, and get as many envelopes as you need. Plus, you're a city agency. I'm pretty sure that if you call that particular Staples and tell them that you need thousands of envelopes, they will make it happen. They will have somebody get a case of envelopes and take them to you. I mean, I understand, when I was officially born, I was officially born at 12:35 a.m. on May 24th, which meant I was born at night, but it wasn't last night. And come on. You're right, Lance, when you say that the whole reason behind this, and you don't have to be cynical to think this. All you got to do is have some common sense. You didn't want people to get these envelopes with these assessments and storm City Hall. That's what you were trying to avoid. Period. End of story.
Right, and one of the RCOs is planning that storming of City Hall. Whether it ends up being successful or not, the 46th Ward RCO is circulating a letter asking other RCOs to join them in a demonstration at City Hall. But the other thing I think when we talk about the property tax assessment we ought to talk about is whether it's really necessary, whether this is really something that's automatic and it's something that somehow formulas call into. And I'm not a big fan of the Inquirer editorial board. And forgive me, I'm trying to pull up my thing on the slides on the screen. Alice, thank you, Allison. So the Inquirer editorial board is saying that this is a mistake. It's been a mistake in the past. It's a mistake now. But they go a little further. They say that they had an analysis that showed that they found 30 single-family homes assessed at more than $500,000 below their recent sale price. And those homes were in Center City. So much for actual value. And then they did another assessment, and they found out that the working class neighborhoods in Philadelphia, West Oak Lane, Nicetown, some of Germantown, where people who because they live in Philadelphia and are working can still afford a house. Those neighborhoods are being hit with the largest tax increases. And this is what the Inquirer found in their own brief analysis. And, there's no real formula or no real proof that they're right. So what OPA itself is saying is, hey, they use different formulas to get different results. And this comes from their own report. This is not something I made up or the newspaper made up or a researcher found. This comes from OPA's own report. There's no single formula that is used, as each model will generate a different constant and a different set of adjustment coefficients. So based on what these quote unquote experts decide is who pays more taxes and who doesn't. And as Larry had asked earlier, this is really an example of taxation without representation because these people are hidden. We don't know who they are. We don't know who the consultants are that did this. We don't know anything about it. But what we do know is what they're saying. And that becomes very clear that they use a mass appraisal model. That is a model that if you change some of the inputs will have very different outputs. And it's not a question of does their view and does their opinion and does their prejudice and their biases have an impact on who pays more and who pays less. The answer is absolutely it does. And we can see from this slide, and I think that I don't know how to drop the slide thing from this show. But if you look at what what OPA says it considers, it actually considers amenities. It considers the view amenities. It considers the property style. And, we may all agree that having a garage is a big deal. We may all agree that the lot size is a big deal. But what does it mean when the assessor says, we're going to judge how much your house is worth based on the amenities? So in my neighborhood, I don't have a coffee shop. Does that lower my amenity value? In my neighborhood, I can walk to the grocery store, but I can't park. Does that mean my amenity is higher or lower? And these are all value judgments by people who decide what's best for us without us being involved. And when you start thinking about things like view amenities, it becomes even stranger. What does that mean? So where I'm living, there's a lot of development around me. My view is being blocked by newer buildings. Does that mean because my view amenities are going down, my property value is going down? Well, that's not what OPA is saying. And there's no way for me to know how OPA has decided what my view amenity is, what my amenities are from where I live. And they obviously have no idea what the inside condition of my house is. They just don't have any idea whatsoever. I don't have central air conditioning. I don't know whether they know that or they don't. And there's no way for me to know whether they know that or they don't, because when I look it up online, it doesn't say. So they hide all of this. The other thing is that our decision of how we treat people is incredibly meaningful. And I know we've been very fortunate to have on spokespeople for the city administration. And they talk about all the things that the city is trying to do to create economic justice and racial justice. But again, this comes from OPA itself. And what they say is they can't consider length of ownership, and they can't consider identity or of the owner or occupant, and they can't consider any demographic data. So here you have, again, some institution that is setting taxes that actually creates gentrification. And they're doing it not by accident, they're doing it on purpose by being blind to what the effect of what they do is. They say, we're neutral. We're not going to look at anything. And that's a very interesting way of thinking about it, because what that would mean is that they would be opposed to any type of affirmative action. They'd be opposed to any type of help for people of color. They'd be opposed to any type of help for local businesses to get contracts. Because if you don't look at things historically and you just look at things in a freeze frame time moment, you don't understand what's going on. So when OPA says we don't consider how long someone's been in the neighborhood, we don't consider the demographics, we don't consider any of the historical data that got us into the situation where people of color are living at and below poverty levels at much higher rates than people who look like me are. They're saying we're not going to look at that history. We're not going to look at how we arrived here, while we have the administration who hires OPA and is in charge of OPA saying that's really what they're all about. They're really all about helping people of color get contracts, help lift people out of poverty, help create racial justice. But when it comes time to think about the impact of their tax structure, they say, we're not going to think about any of those things. We're not even going to consider it. And I find that very upsetting that we allow them to talk out of both sides of their mouth. And Larry already brought this up, so I'm not going to spend any more time on it. But the last audit of OPA by the city controller pointed out that it was a bad assessment. There is nothing professional about these. They hire a consultant who creates one formula. They don't like that formula. They create another formula. They have all of these ways of thinking about things that they plug into the formula. Your view amenities, your property amenities. Are you near the river? Are you not near the river? Is it a good thing if you live near the stadium? Well, on one hand, that's good. It's easy for you to get to the games. I know Denise and her husband might like to live near the stadium, make it easy for him to get to work. I'm not a big sports fan. Living next to the stadium, to me, would not be an amenity. It would actually be a lot of noise and something I would try and avoid. For many years,
was a lot of noise when we did it.
For many years, I lived in East Oak Lane. East Oak Lane, you can't really walk to any store. There's no supermarket nearby, but the houses have yards, and most of the houses are either twins or singles, and you have a driveway, and the houses tend to be bigger than they are in other parts of the city. But there are those amenities. Is having a backyard an amenity, but not being near a supermarket and amenity. Well, those are all value judgments, and we're allowing these people to make these value judgments about our homes without us knowing what value judgments they've made. So I'm going to take down this slideshow and go back to what I'm talking about. So, it's helpful for CLS to talk about the programs, but we really don't know how many people are enrolled in the programs. We do know that the Loop program has a very poor subscription to it. There's almost 400,000 owner-occupied homes. There's less than 15,000 people in the Loop program. If you do the math, you're talking about less than 2%. We don't know how many people are in the senior program because they don't publicize it. We do know that there's not 100% of the people eligible for the homestead that get it. And again, that becomes one of those things where it's really a curiosity, where the city says, well, they believe 385,000 people are owner-occupied housing, and they make an estimate to that, in fact, but they don't automatically enroll people in that. I'm not sure it's such a great advancement to say, well, we've now discovered that when someone qualifies for another program to put them in that. I'm not quite sure why it took us 20 years to figure that out. If you qualify for PGW's low-income plan, that should mean that you get in the water department's low-income plan, that it means you should get the homestead exemption if you live in your home. We're not doing that yet, and the fact that we're kind of doing that, I'm not sure. I mean, obviously, it's an improvement to do some of it, but I'm not sure how much we should applaud someone for doing something so obvious and not doing it all the way.
Right. And, automatically enrolling people in Homestead and other programs might mean that there's a handful of people who are enrolled who maybe shouldn't be, but that's a lesser concern than getting the people in it who need it. And that was one of the questions we had for the revenue department. I can't quite remember the answer, but there was a reason why they said they couldn't do it.
They don't know. They would be enrolled. Some people would get the benefit who didn't deserve it.
Yeah. And you know what? In the grand scheme of things, I'm less concerned about that. But that seems like an easy thing to do.
It just seems a lot easier to remove 30,000 people than to add 485,000. So,
yeah.
So, you look at the amount of work. All right, you want to prove that those 30,000 people don't really live there? Go at it. But in the meantime, let everyone who should qualify get it and go after the 35,000. I do want to also talk a little bit about the wage tax. So again, following on Denise's point that not mailing out the notices stops people from going to City Hall. So what this has allowed the mayor to talk about is he's going to use some of that windfall tax increase. And be assured, a 31% increase on average on real estate assessment, if you don't change the tax rate, means a 31% increase in tax revenues. That's what it translates to, unless you do something else. So the mayor is saying, well, he's going to use that money to lower the wage tax. Now, even the Inquirer says it's a bad idea. But I think we ought to help people understand what that means. So if they lower the wage tax by 0.1%, and you make $100,000 a year, 1% of that would be 1,000. 0.1% of that would be 100. So you would get $100 back. In the meantime, your property taxes are going to go up by 31%. So if you were paying $2,000 in property taxes, you're going to end up paying much more in property tax increases than you're going to get back in wage tax reductions. The more money someone makes, the closer it comes to a break-even point. So someone who's making $400,000 a year is going to end up getting the benefit of a wage tax reduction and is going to end up winning because their property taxes, even with a 31% increase, are not going to go up as much as what they're going to get back by a wage tax cut if they make $300,000 a year. So this is really a rebalancing that the mayor's proposing that would give tax cuts to the higher income people at the expense of people who are living in their homes and of moderate income.
Now, if I were being a cynic, which in this case I am being a cynic, the fact that this is happening has a direct cause and effect to, I guess, I see gentrification here. Lots and lots and lots of gentrification. And I don't think it's unintentional, especially when you take into consideration the fact that you have all of these homes that have been built since the street administration that have where people have paid no taxes on them in 10 years. And some of these houses are worth as much as $500,000 townhouses, which if you had ever told me that I would ever see a $500,000 townhouse anywhere, much less Philadelphia, I'd have looked at you like you were absolutely nuts, because you would have to be. No one would pay $500,000 for a townhouse. Even, and meanwhile, there are people who have been living in row homes for years. You have the 80-year-old woman whose husband bought her the row home when he came back from World War II, and now she's about to get priced out of it. And I mean, I remember when I was living in Northern Liberties, which is, one of those neighborhoods that it is impossible for you to find anywhere to live unless you're coming up with like a suitcase full of money and a need to spend it. There was a lady that lived across the street from me that had this row home that her husband had bought it for when he came home from the war. It was this big Victorian house with stained glass windows and it was beautiful hardwood floors, the whole 9 yards. And every time I would see one of these stories about taxes, I'm like, I hope this woman hasn't finally been priced out of her home. And, that's a reality. There's a lot of people who are going to have to give up places that they have been living in some cases, their whole lives, because of an assessment so arbitrary that it doesn't make sense.
Right. It's a public policy decision. What we used to do was say that we want people to stay in their neighborhoods. We want them to raise their families. We want them to know the people on their block. We want them to be connected. And we're going to do what we can to help them stay in their homes and to help them be connected and to help them support the neighborhood. And what we've decided is, instead of doing that, we're going to have a public policy that's going to punish people who stayed in their neighborhood, worked together, and made the neighborhood better. And that's really what my neighbors in Hawthorne are very upset about, that many of these are older people of color who have spent 20 years struggling so that there's now a park that plays jazz concerts 3 times in the summer. Much to my surprise, we have a strong contingent of people who want to see a Shakespeare play in our park. I wouldn't have guessed that, to be honest, but there you are. And we have movie nights for the kids. The animated movies, again, maybe not your first choice to go to an outdoor movie and watch kids run around and shout and have a great time and watch a bad movie. But these are all tremendous successes that these people, these neighborhood leaders won. And now people want to move into the neighborhood. The housing prices are skyrocketing, and the assessments are forcing some of these people out. And they're not poor. I don't want to say that these are poor people. They make $40,000, $50,000 a year. So they're not poor enough to qualify for anything, but they're also not wealthy enough, and they're not in an industry where their pay is going to go up to keep up with what's happening with the assessments. So they don't qualify for the programs, and they're now being said, thank you very much for fixing up, for straightening up, for organizing, for doing all the hard work. Now you're going to have to leave, and someone else is going to enjoy your 20 years of hard work. And I find that offensive as a public policy. We should be saying we want people to stay in their neighborhood. We want to reward people who do what we ask them to do, which is to be good neighbors, to be good people, to take care of each other. And that should be our public policy. If you're willing to help out, to pitch in, to make the neighborhood safer. We want to do what we can to help you stay here.
And one thing that concerns me, the assessment, that the data that was used to determine the assessments really only got into the first part of 2021. It hasn't taken in the rest of 2021 yet. And just this is anecdotally, this is in my neighborhood. A lot of houses were sold in that time period that wasn't accounted for, that were much higher than the houses around them, because the real estate levels increased so much. So if they do another assessment in a year or two that's going to include that data, it could be this same problem again in 2 years, because you have these housing prices that skyrocketed in that time frame, and I'm very concerned about that as well. What I still think is a little confounding, and Lance, you've touched on this, Denise, you've touched on this. In other municipalities across the state, I think every municipality actually, there's an adjustment when the assessments go up. They'll adjust the tax rate, so it keeps your property taxes roughly the same. We're not going to do that, and I haven't heard anything from anyone that suggests that the millage rate will be adjusted. I just don't think that's on the table right now.
And to speak to Denise's point, that's because people don't understand what's happening, or not enough people. Again, the 5% of us that read the newspapers, that follow the city council hearings, that understand what government's doing, we know. But the 95% of us who have other lives, who are doing other things, we don't know yet. And when we get that envelope after the council session's over for the summer, after the budget's fixed, we're going to be angry, and we're not going to have any way of changing the tax rate, or what they call the millage rate. And I would have to agree with Denise. I'm not sure it's an accident.
So anything that's going to happen has to happen now, before the end of this council session. And like I said, we've seen some council members put forth, I think, good pieces of legislation to try to help get around this, but hopefully that's not the end of it. I wanted to address one or two things. We've received more inquiries and questions from people on social media, via email, or people just talking to us about these reassessments than anything else that we've been covering. So we've been getting one or two questions a lot, and I'll mention these really quickly. One key question is, have city council members voted for an increase in taxes? And the answer to that is no. City council really doesn't have anything to do with the assessments. It's kind of like OPA is kind of a quasi independent agency. And all city council can do is kind of react to whatever the assessments are. So I just want people to understand that, because a lot of people are like, well, they voted for this. Why? Well, they didn't. But they're trying to figure out how to get around it. And then the other question, and we've talked about this, what can people do to appeal who don't have access to a computer? One of the things that, or limited access to a computer, you got to, we're doing the best we can. If you have neighbors, talk to them about it, let them know what happened. And we're going to have in our email newsletter some ways that people can find their assessments that are hopefully helpful. So those are some of the things that we're going to be working on. We're going to stick with this because so many people are asking us about it. So we want to make sure people feel more informed about it.
And when you get that letter that says this is not a tax bill, don't put it aside, read it. There'll be a phone number in there with the rules about how you can do both the lower level and the full dispute of the tax assessment.
Right. And depending on when you get it, you may not have much time to appeal. All right. So, well, thank you all for joining us, and look for our newsletter, and we will see you all next week.
Have a good night.